Matt Schaff and Jared Smola of DraftSharks.com here to get you set for your Week 6 waiver wire runs. We will be talking through the top waiver wire targets for this week, but you can also find our Week 6 waiver wire pickups live on DraftSharks.com right now. Goes beyond the guys that we're talking about on this show, gives bid recommendations for all the players you're looking at, deep league options, drop candidates, a weekly grab this guy who is an upside stash if you're looking for that kind of help as opposed to somebody to, help this week's lineup. Plus there's an IDP edition if you like to play all of fantasy football like I do. We've got IDP waiver wire pickups. Check it all out at draftsharks.com. Jared, I had a dream last night that it was 2018 and I pinched myself. And then I realized that I was not asleep at all. And I was actually watching JuJu Smith-Schuster catch 7 passes for 130 yards. What's going on? Like we mentioned him on the show last week. How do we react to last night? Was this a fluke or is it somebody that we need to have on our teams?
JuJu Smith-Schuster and Kareem Hunt were the two highest scoring fantasy players in that game. So it was totally 2018 vibes there. Like you said, Matt, we talked about it on last week's show. We recommended JuJu as a deep add last week, thinking that he might be the guy to at least help replace Rashee Rice. And that's what we saw last night. 45% of JuJu's snaps came in the slot in that game against the Saints. Rice was at 44% for the season. 8 targets for JuJu Smith-Schuster, 20.5% target share. If he can be anywhere near that going forward in this Mahomes-led offense, like JuJu is going to be someone who, especially during the bye weeks here, we can consider starting. And he looked pretty good, right? I mean, he kind of had the bad drop in the end zone, but otherwise, I thought he played a pretty good game. And as we said, this was a guy who was a top 30 PPR wide receiver just a couple seasons ago in Kansas City. So I could definitely see him being, a wide receiver 3 in PPR going forward.
And he was right with Xavier Worthy and Justin Watson in playing time. So it's not like it was a totally fluky number of targets versus playing time. And I mean, that's what we like about him here. He's among the top 3 receivers in Kansas City with Patrick Mahomes. We have not seen Xavier Worthy become a higher volume receiver through the first 5 games. It's early in his career, so that's not a knock on him. It's just looking at the reality of the current situation. They're probably not going to turn the rookie into a number 1 type at receiver. So that leaves opportunity available. Travis Kelce remains limited, had another good game last night, but he's clearly not, explosive young Travis Kelce. He's older, like Jason Witten, like Travis Kelce. So there's opportunity here and we might as well keep attacking it. I agree. If you expect wide receiver 3 level production from JuJu going forward, then you're probably not going to wind up disappointed. I think he's not only somebody to pick up this week, I think he's the pickup among wide receivers, somebody who could really help you the rest of the way. Certainly not to the degree he did last night, because the last time he had numbers like that was actually 2018 with Pittsburgh, but he doesn't need numbers like that to help you going forward. Tank Bigsby probably didn't help too many teams because there weren't fantasy managers starting him for the most part in week 5, but he did carry 13 times, racked up 101 yards on the ground, 2 rushing touchdowns in the win over the Colts. He also had his first target of the season. So what do we make of this outing that included the first time that Bigsby played more snaps than Travis Etienne this year?
Most of that came in the fourth quarter. Bigsby outsnapped Etienne 11-2 in the fourth quarter. Carries were 6-0 in favor of Bigsby in the fourth quarter. Doug Peterson has said that Travis Etienne aggravated his shoulder injury again, and that's why he didn't play much late in the game. I kind of sort of buy that. I more don't buy that. Like, I think Etienne, he was targeted in the fourth quarter, so it's not like he didn't play at all. Again, he played 2 snaps. I think it was just, they rode the hot hand in Tank Bigsby. And that's what I think this is going to be going forward. I don't think Bigsby is all of a sudden going to come out this weekend and start the game and dominate Travis Etienne and carries. I would even bet on Etienne still starting the game and them just kind of seeing who's more effective and kind of riding that guy. And that's been Tank Bigsby so far. So it would not surprise me at all if, Bigsby ends up with more carries in week 6 here. Bigsby is the top waiver ad this week, I think, just because of how well he's played this season and the chance that he does emerge as, at least the lead ball carrier for these Jags.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, we talked about it before. If Travis Etienne goes down, then Tank Bigsby is the lead back for this team. And even a bad Jaguars offense has supplied some running back value. If the offense improves, as it seems like it has over the past 2 weeks, that only helps them. And of course, Tank Bigsby is helping himself. It's going to be frustrating for fantasy managers, but it obviously makes sense for Jacksonville to vary its RB usage, especially by week, depending on who is, playing better or worse in a given game. So it only adds value that there's the potential for Bigsby to get more playing time, even with Travis Etienne in the lineup. It was also fun to see this week that Coach Speak Index gives Doug Peterson a 35% reliability rating. So keep that in mind when we're trying to parse the words that he gives to reporters. Tyrone Tracy got his first start for the Giants in that surprising victory at Seattle. And he probably left them thinking, Devin who? Because Tracy took 18 carries for 129 yards. He did get out targeted by Eric Gray, but edged Eric Gray in routes. Should we go get Tyrone Tracy the same way we are Tank Bigsby this week?
Yeah, it's funny. I think in an alternate universe, Eric Gray might outtouch Tyrone Tracy in that game, because the first series of the game was 6 opportunities for Eric Gray to 2 for Tyrone Tracy, and then Gray had that goal line fumble, and that was kind of it. It was mostly Tracy the rest of the way, as it should have been. I mean, Tyrone Tracy is the better running back. I think that's clear, especially after this game. I wish the Giants would say Singletary who at this point. I don't think that's going to happen. Brian Daboll loves Devin Singletary. He, had him in Buffalo, brought him over to the Giants with him, and Singletary has been okay this season, as he's been throughout his career. He's like just good enough as a veteran to like hang on to the lead job. So I do think Tracy cuts more into Singletary's work going forward. I don't think, at least in the short term, Tracy will be a fantasy starter, but at least he showed us that if Singletary misses more time, Tracy's someone we can start pretty comfortably.
Yeah, I would think that he showed the Giants that he's somebody who should get some touches going forward. I agree. Devin Singletary is the reliable veteran, has history with Brian Daboll, has the contract showing how much they think of him. So he's not going to go anywhere when healthy, but maybe he cedes some touches to Tracy. And like we saw against Seattle, the next time he goes down, Tyrone Tracy could be in fantasy lineups for that week at the very least. Speaking of handcuff value, Jared, you and Kevin and Shane brought up Blake Corum as a guy for our waiver wire pickups article this week. And I was like, why? What's going on with Blake Corum? Isn't he just kind of already rostered at the level he should be? I hadn't yet realized at that point a fairly subtle change for him in week 5. What was that change?
Yeah, Corum played ahead of Ronnie Rivers, which the only other time that was the case this season in terms of snaps was week 2 when the Rams lost 41-10 to the Cardinals and Corum got a bunch of mop-up duty. Otherwise, it had been Ronnie Rivers kind of operating as the number 2 running back. In this game, it was 6 opportunities for Blake Corum to 0 for Ronnie Rivers. Corum even got 3 carries inside the 10-yard line, which I was watching the game. I was just surprised because that's always Kyren Williams. Now, Corum didn't capitalize on any of those, and then Kyren came in for, I believe it was 4th down and scored a rushing touchdown. So again, Corum, no threat to Kyren, but I think we now know he's the number 2 running back, where that was not clear for the first month in the season. And I think that probably got Corum dropped in plenty of fantasy leagues. So I think Corum's back to being, a top 5 handcuff. So if you have room for those types of players in your league and Corum is available, scoop him up this week. Because if Kyren Williams goes down, I think Corum is pretty easily going to be a top 20 running back weekly in our rankings.
Yeah, it's one of the few times where a running back not getting into the end zone was a good thing for fantasy, because if Corum did come away from that game with a rushing touchdown, he would have opened a lot more eyes. But it was definitely a positive development. It was worrisome over the first 4 games that he was not getting on the field, because we all kind of expected Corum to at least play some role in the offense, if not, actually siphon touches away from Kyren Williams. It's clear that's not going to happen, but all it takes is a Kyren Williams injury at this point, likely to make Blake Corum at least the heavy leader in a backfield tandem, if not, the direct replacement for Kyren Williams. Now, there are probably plenty of people who are like, great guys, Tank Bigsby, Tyrone Tracy, Blake Corum have all been rostered in my league since before last week's games happened. So any other running back stashes for folks who might not have those options?
Yeah, I was really impressed this past week by Jalen Wright, who ended up playing a big role for the Dolphins after Devon Achane left that game in the first quarter. Jalen Wright, 13 carries for 86 yards, 6.6 yards per carry. Looked explosive. Again, he got that work because Achane went down, but Wright was also active for that game over Jeff Wilson. So we know he's the locked-in number 3 at this point. He's back to looking like the handcuff to either Devon Achane or Raheem Mostert. Even in week 4, when Achane played and Mostert was out, Jalen Wright had 10 opportunities in that game to Devon Achan's 13. So I'm back to believing that, even when, if Mostert misses more time, they don't want to have Achan handling, 25 opportunities again. Wright's going to mix in. He just looks explosive. I think he's a good fit in this offense. Jalen Wright actually led all 32 qualifying running backs this past week in Pro Football Focus rushing grade. So, it wasn't just my eyes telling me he had a nice game. PFF agrees with that. So I just think he's an upside stash. And the Dolphins have a bye this week. Achan should be back for week 7 off the concussion. But if either of those top two backs miss any more time this season, I think Wright's someone who's probably going to be, in flex consideration for fantasy rosters.
Yeah, having the two running backs ahead of him obviously doesn't help his immediate opportunity, but having those 2 points to be a handcuff where if either guy goes down, like you said, Jalen Wright becomes a potential option, especially with plenty more bye weeks ahead. He certainly makes for a nice stash. I would also like to stash Kendre Miller. We talked about him over the summer, and then he had as disappointing a summer as possible where he couldn't get over injury. But Kendre Miller returns to a backfield that is still Alvin Kamara and not much else. Jamal Williams remains a limited performer. Alvin Kamara is dominating that backfield and probably will be as long as he's healthy, but that also means we're a Kamara injury away from lots of opportunity being available. There's room for Kendre Miller to show that he should be the primary fill-in if Alvin Kamara goes down. And really, the Saints, after a couple of huge weeks to start the season, have gotten very disappointing on offense. So they should be motivated to get Miller some touches, assuming he looks good in practice and is all the way back to full health, to see if he can help the offense, to see if he can take a little bit away from Kamara so that they don't overwork Kamara through the rest of the season.
Yeah, and a lot of that Alvin Kamara efficiency came out of the gate hot along with the Saints, but that's kind of taken a step back these past 3 weeks. And I think a lot of that's the offensive line injuries and just the Saints' struggles in general. But, Kamara still, I think, is a declining player. I think there's room for Kendre carve out a bit of a role. Dennis Allen's even said a few nice things about him over these last couple of weeks, saying that he's, looked good in practice so far. So I do think there's really no reason if he's healthy for him not to be the number 2 back on this team.
And the Saints did take him in the 3rd round just last year. So it's not like they started out disliking him. Stash Kendre Miller if you got room, especially if you don't have any of those other running backs available on waivers. Back to wide receiver now, Jared, before we close out with the streaming defenses. Jalen Tolbert, a team high 10 targets against the Steelers on Sunday night, caught 7 of them for 87 yards and the game-winning touchdown. It seems like a good spot in which to be the 3rd receiver, and right now, really the number 2 receiver.
Yeah, number 2 receiver, I think clear number 3 option in the passing game, right? Because CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson's been heavily involved. Tolbert did lead in targets in that game against the Steelers. That can happen every once in a while. I don't think it's going to happen most weeks. I think most weeks will be 3rd in the pecking order here.
You're going to have an angry CeeDee Lamb if we get Jalen Tolbert leading the team in targets most weeks.
Yeah, really. I would just be careful not to go overboard with Tolbert on waiver wires this week. I like him as like a week 6 spot starter if you're in trouble at wide receiver. Cowboys Lions this week should be a high scoring game. Cowboys are underdogs. Lions are maybe the biggest pass funnel defense in the NFL. Just a really tough run D. If the Cowboys are smart, they're not going to try running too much in that game. So I think, again, I would expect CD and Ferguson to out target Tolbert this weekend, but I think you could still get 6, 7, 8 targets out of Tolbert. Beyond that, the Cowboys have a week 7 bye. Brandon Cooks probably back after that. And I think Tolbert probably outproduces Cooks the rest of the way, but like when Cooks is back on the field, that's just another thing in the way of Tolbert being a reliable fantasy play.
This is a shallow offense, though. I mean, I agree. He's not going to be a reliable fantasy play most likely, but it's Lamb, it's Jake Ferguson, who we've seen Tolbert can duke for targets. And then Brandon Cooks, there's room if Jalen Tolbert plays well over the next 3 weeks to compete with Brandon Cooks, maybe even out target him beyond that, because Cooks is aging. Tolbert has been a guy that's gotten talked up in Dallas, and he's been on the field pretty close to the same amount as Lamb and Cooks when they've all been healthy early this season. So it's a good spot to be that kind of maybe wide receiver. And I agree. You take him this week, see what happens. If it's good stuff, that's only going to leave the coaches feeling good about him heading into the bye. And, we'll see coming out of it.
Yeah, sure. Again, I would expect Tolbert to outproduce Cooks the rest of the way. I love Brandon Cooks. He's been one of my guys for a while, but he's definitely just about out of gas at this point. I think Tolbert's a better player right now. Not
to mention, we'll see about the knee. He's on IR, so we assume that after 4 games he'll be good, but you never know until the guy actually makes it back. Josh Downs, just 28% rostered on Sleeper as of Monday morning after games of 8 and 9 catches the past 2 weeks. Are you buying him on waivers this week?
I am. Yeah, I would prioritize Downs over Jalen Tolbert pretty easily. I'd have Downs closer to JuJu than Tolbert. Downs is the number 2 waiver target among wide receivers. 26 targets for Josh Downs in his 3 games back now from that high ankle sprain, a 27% target share. Michael Pittman, 22 targets on a 23% target share over that span. Fantasy points tracks first read targets now. Over the last 3 weeks, Josh Downs has 25 first read targets to 18 for Michael Pittman. That shows us, kind of who these offenses are designing plays for. And, right now it's been Downs getting more of those first read looks than Michael Pittman. Unfortunately, Anthony Richardson is probably coming back to ruin this all. Just the decreased pass volume and decreased pass efficiency with Richardson in there definitely is going to ding both Josh Downs and Michael Pittman. And I don't think Josh Downs is going to continue on a 24% target share, but if he can stay at, 23, 24%, even with Anthony Richardson, Downs can be a borderline wide receiver 3, really good wide receiver 4, I think.
The Anthony Richardson factor is exactly why I'm not very interested in Josh Downs this week. I'm pretty easily taking JuJu first. I would rather take Tolbert than Downs, although they're pretty close. I don't know that I really care much between them. We're talking about a short range wide receiver with a quarterback who throws deep really well and hasn't done a whole lot else well passing so far. And we had Shane Steichen say, yeah, when Richardson's healthy, he's our starting quarterback. So to me, Josh Downs looks like he's going to be a roster clogger as long as Richardson's healthy. That said, you're the next Anthony Richardson injury away from Joe Flacco being the starter and then making Josh Downs potentially a weekly wide receiver 3. So, if you want to look that far ahead and consider Josh Downs a semi-handcuff in that way, I certainly have no problem with that.
Yeah, and if Downs is a roster clogger, then Michael Pittman's a roster clogger too. So maybe you can think about that if he's on your roster as he comes off a pretty decent week 5. Maybe he's a guy to sell.
Now, I was already looking at a certain roster where I have a glut at wide receiver and thinking that Pittman might be a good sell this week. So I'll report back and see what I can get. On to the streaming defenses for this week and next. Jared, it's just going to be one defense for me between them because the Chargers are just 9% rostered on Sleeper as we speak. Coming off a bye, it makes sense, but they're also 6th in fantasy points per game, according to ESPN scoring so far, 3rd in DVOA. So it's been a very good defense, leading the league in points allowed per game at just 12.5 so far. The reason to beyond those factors, like the Chargers, is the upcoming schedule. This week against Denver makes them at the very least a week 6 streamer. But I think you can play the Chargers all the way up until week 11 at least, because they're at Arizona after this week. Arizona's very up and down, so that could be a bad week or it could be an excellent week. We'll see. Then home for New Orleans, at Cleveland versus Tennessee before a week 11 home date with Cincinnati. We'll see where the Chargers and Bengals are at that point, see if I'm willing to play the Chargers then. But I think we've got a defense that we can play for at least the next 5 games.
Yeah, I look through all these defensive metrics every week, and I can't believe how high the Chargers are in all of them. They're 3rd in defensive DVOA. They're also 8th in yards per play allowed. So it's just been a really good defense. And like you said, Matt, this week they're playing Denver. The Broncos have the 2nd lowest implied total on the week. So Chargers are a really safe play. I think a more boom bust play this week would be the Colts. We'll have to see what the Titans are doing at quarterback. It sounds like Levis is going to be ready. Brian Callahan said that he's going to be able to practice on Wednesday, and Callahan has said that a healthy Levis is still their starter. If you're using the Colts, you want it to be Levis because he has been a turnover machine, obviously, for the first 4 games of the season. So I think the Colts not a good defense, but the matchup against Tennessee gives them some upside as a week 6 streamer.
Do you have any other options for week 7 if the Chargers are not available for people?
Yeah, I think attacking the Browns makes a lot of sense as long as Deshaun Watson's under center. Even if they turn to Jameis Winston, that'll still be a pretty nice target. So the Bengals get the Browns in week 7. I think they're worth considering. The Bills get the Titans in week 7. They're worth considering. And then again, this Patriots offense and this Denver offense are ones I like going after for floor, especially. Jacksonville gets New England in week 7 and the Saints get the Broncos in week 7. So I think all 4 of those teams are nice spot starters for that week.
You can check our team defense streaming article every week. You can check our week 6 waiver wire pickups, or you can head straight to the free agent finder that is synced directly with your league. See exactly who the best available options are in your specific league. Get projections and recommendations based on your system and your particular situation. Sort by the parameters you want. This week's projections, next week's, rest of season. Use whatever you choose and let Draft Sharks be your unfair advantage.